Hey there, Chad here with another episode of Kerbal Space Program in 2021. In this tutorial, we are going to go for orbit around the planet. In the previous episode, we did a suborbital flight. We also did some tests to earn a little bit of money. In this episode, we will spend a few science points that we made. We will upgrade a few buildings to make obtaining orbit a little easier, and then we'll move on from there and see what happens. Let's get to it. Okay, we still have a few science points we can spend. There's 55 points. We're going to go to the research center, and there are two areas that I'm most interested in for now. One would be advanced rocketry. That's going to give us a larger fuel tank. It also gives us an engine that is very efficient in orbit. And that one might be what we go for here. The other one is aviation, and I'm interested in aviation because it gives us some tools that make for gathering some science locally on the planet a heck of a lot easier. I think because I want to get to orbit in this mission, we're going to go with advanced rocketry. So I'm going to purchase that. The other thing I'm going to need to do is upgrade a few of these buildings. The three that I'm looking at are mission control, the tracking station, and the launch pad. We need to upgrade the launch pad to allow for larger rockets. We can make it to orbit with a fairly simple small rocket, but we are limited on our part count and our size, and the real limiting factor is the weight. The weight of the rocket can't exceed, I think it's 18 tons, it might be 20 tons, but it's that neighborhood. The tracking station and mission control work together to allow us to plot nodes that are helpful in doing navigation. They allow us to set a change for the rocket that we will execute, but it allows us to demonstrate where that needs to happen, and it gives us a visual of what that change affects in the trajectory of the rocket. I'll demonstrate that a little bit today, and we're going to use that tool to get into orbit. It just makes it a whole lot simpler. The problem is these three buildings are kind of expensive in combination. If you right-click on them, mission control is not too bad, 75,000. I'm going to go ahead and grab that. And the launch pad isn't too bad on its own either. It's only 50,000. It's going to allow us, current weight maximum is 18 tons. It'll allow us to go up to 140 tons, so we gain a little bit of space there. The tracking station is a little expensive. Again, you right click on that, it's a 150,000, and we're at 168,000. So here's my thought. I'm going to go ahead and spend it. I'm going to build a relatively simple rocket this time anyway, I already know that. And we're going to earn some money back for doing the orbit. There will be a milestone for obtaining orbit, and then there's also the contract that we're going to pick up. So it'll be a little close on funds for a bit, but I'm going to go ahead and go for that. I'm also going to run some missions to just gain cash to allow for better funding in probably the next episode, or maybe as a sidebar prior to the next episode. So I'm going to upgrade that. And I'm going to go to mission control, and I'm going to grab the Orbit Kerbin contract, and that'll pay us close to 50,000. That's not too bad. So we're definitely going to grab that one. I'm looking over this list. There's nothing in here that I really want to absolutely do right now. So I'm going to skip it for now. Again, the reason for upgrading mission control, one is to give you more contracts that you can have active. We only had 2, now I can have up to 7. The other part of it, though, is the node navigation that it, in concert with the tracking station, allows. Just to put in perspective the cost of the various buildings, we saw this was 50 and 75,000, and then 150. The vehicle assembly building is 225, and research and development is 451. So those get pricey. The space plane is the same, or well, actually 225. We also have the astronaut complex. This allows us to do EVAs. And that's one we definitely are going to want to grab soon. EVAs give us a lot of science, and it also allows us to place flags in various locations. And again, that gives us science points for accomplishing that. I don't do a whole lot with the administration building. Its upgrade is fairly expensive, 150,000. And in the building, just so that it's said, what this allows us to do is set priorities. And these priorities basically will convert certain aspects. So you have your 3 resources. You have money, reputation, and science. And you basically can take some of one of them and turn it into another one. That's really what's going on here. There are a few things that are like one-time purchases. You can immediately expend a certain amount of funds and gain, I think you're gaining science. No, you lose reputation, you gain funds with this one. This one is you gain funds, you lose science. So you're selling patents, I think is the idea. Anyway, those are some things you can set. Right now we could set a maximum of one of those. I am not going to use that at all right now. Maybe in the future, if we start to see we need a little more science or a little more money, we'll do some conversions there. But as of right now, that's not in the cards for me. Okay, I'm going to jump into the vehicle assembly building, and we're going to build this rocket. Now, I want to build a rocket that I know is going to make it into orbit. So we're going to have a heat shield since it will be coming back from orbit, but I don't intend for it to be an exceptionally high orbit. So I'm going to bring this down. We'll set it to 40. So that's saving some weight is what it's really doing. I need to put a parachute on it. I'm not going to worry about gathering science on this particular mission. Normally, you should collect science on every opportunity that you have. For today, I'm going to maybe say, let's just get into orbit, see what that looks like, and move on. Okay, here's where this is going to be a little interesting. Now, one of the reasons I had to go ahead and upgrade the launch pad out there was because we're going to build a rocket that has stages, and those stages are going to be, it's going to include kind of something similar to the booster rockets that you see on the space shuttle. It's going to be disposable rockets that peel off as the spacecraft climbs. The other decision I'm kind of teetering on is whether or not I want to use this Terrier engine, and I think I'm going to, but maybe with a smaller fuel tank. This is going to basically be, I think I want to use this for re-entry. This will fire to slow us down to give it a re-entry. That's all that I want that for. We'll put another coupler. Also, we're going to have a series of stages. Right now, as you can see, we have technically 4 stages, including the parachutes. This will probably be a 6 or 7 stage rocket once we're done. So now I'm going to come back. I'm going to add that fuel tank again. I'm going to add a second one. And then at the bottom of this, I'm going to put a swivel engine. The swivel engine and the Reliant engine are really similar. They differ that the swivel gives you some vectored thrust. You can steer a little bit with it, and you lose a little bit of power. The Reliant, not steerable, a little more power. Something to note on these, and this will become important as we move forward. This thrust value here, this is a value that kind of gives us an indication of the engine's efficiency. ASL means at sea level. So in full atmosphere, at ocean level, it's going to have an efficiency of 205. But in a vacuum, it's going to be 240. It's much more efficient in a vacuum. Okay, so that's the Reliant engine, and keep that in mind. We're going to look at the Terrier real quick. So the Terrier is going to have a much lower efficiency, but you'll notice that its efficiency in a vacuum is 4 times what it is at sea level. It's much more efficient in a vacuum. As you look at engines and decide what you want to use, that's something to consider. This one will work in a vacuum much better than any of the other ones we have right now. This FUD, you look at that one, it's better in a vacuum, and most of them will be slightly better in vacuum, is what it really comes down to. But you'll notice that the swivel, it certainly isn't 4 times. It's less than 50% better. The FUD, again, same concept. It's about, I guess, about 20%, not even, better in a vacuum. But you got this Terrier, and it's 400% better. So that's just something to look at and to pay attention to. We will also use Kerbal Engineer Redux here to determine the capabilities of our rocket to decide if it's going to make it into orbit. And I'll demonstrate that here in just a minute. Let's finish building this guy. So we're going to put that engine there. And I'm going to put some fins on this. I think we're going to stick with simple fins. And we're going to do 4 of them. And I like to put those at about 45 degrees. That looks pretty good. So that's the 4 fins to help keep the nose pointing in the right direction. Next, I'm going to add a radial decoupler. Technically, we're going to add 2 of these. So I will set this to dual. And I'm going to drop that, I think, right about here. And so there's one on each side. Now there's two ways we could do this, and I'm realizing we don't have the cool part that allows us to move fuel around easily between tanks. That'll come soon. So that means I think we're going to use the solid rocket boosters, and I think the thumper is overkill. Let me take a look and see what the hammer can do for us, just for fun. So to get to orbit, you have to have 3,400 meters per second of delta V. Delta V is change in velocity, and change in velocity is basically a measurement of force based on mass to generate a certain speed. All engines could be measured this way. We don't tend to do that. We tend to measure in things like horsepower. Delta V has a lot to do with the amount of fuel that's on board, for instance. Lowering the amount of fuel lowers the delta V. So it's not so much an engine efficiency or power as much as a system maximum. So to get to orbit, you can do it a little better. You can do it with a little less than 3,400 meters per second of delta V, but that's a good benchmark to look at. The thing is we noted before, the engines are more efficient in a vacuum, so higher up with less air, than they are at sea level. So as you climb, the efficiency and ultimately the output kind of changes over time. So with this particular setup, at zero, it would not make it to space. It's got a total of 2595, and that might not even be entirely accurate. I need to correct some of the stack to put those in the right order, so we'll look at that here in a second. But what you can see pretty easily is as we slide this to get to 70 kilometers, which is where the atmosphere ends, so this is where vacuum starts. If we were to start there, we would have plenty. We'd have 3,800 meters per second of delta V in order to go. So the real number lies somewhere probably right around here, is my best guess. I don't really know how the math works there exactly. I will tell you this, it's not unusual to have an engine or a setup that says, 2,600 meters here, and you slide it all the way over and it's only saying 2,800. It has to do with the efficiency of the engines, the amount of fuel that's being carried. The staging does make a difference. So let's correct the staging right now. First of all, the one big problem with the staging is we're firing these rockets, and then we're letting them go, and then we're firing the main engine. And I want to do both of those at the same time. The main engine's going to fire along with these. Also, I don't think I like exactly where these are positioned yet, but let's take a look and see what these numbers look like. So I'm going to drop that down here, and you'll notice we lost a little bit, actually. And if we go to the top number, we lost a little bit. So this is slightly less efficient than previously. And that has to do with how much weight this engine is trying to lift. These burn fuel, and as the fuel depletes, the rocket is lighter, so this effectively would have more delta V. And what we're doing now is we're saying, well, you're firing earlier, so it's less efficient at that level, but won't generate the same amount of power. On the other hand, so these are the smaller of the solid rocket engines that we have available. It's not the smallest. We have the Flea, which is half the size basically of that one. But we have this gigantic one, and if we were to use that bad boy, we would have 4,400 delta V. And let me drop that engine in there. Yeah, 4,000. So you know what? I think to be safe, to make sure we have all the fuel we need, let's go ahead and do that. I think it's a little bit of overkill. You'll notice here we would be at 2,700 if we stayed at sea level, but we go up to 4,000. 4,000 should be plenty, so that's not that bad at all. I want to use the move tool. So we usually use the place tool. Place tool drops things in place. There's a couple of other tools to know about, and the reroute tool is that's kind of advanced stuff. I'm not going to mess with that just yet. The move tool allows us to reposition how things are connected. So it's most efficient when dealing with these radial couplers. This is where it really shines. What I do is I click on this rocket, and it gives me these three axes that I can move this in. And I grab one of those arrows, and I can move it up and down. And I want to make this, I'm going to put it right about here, I think, for balance. Also, something to consider is the rockets are going to want to swing out, because here's where their pivot point is. This is where they're connected. So this is basically a big lever right? This would be the fulcrum, and then the short part of the lever. They're going to want to twist out. Once we get a little further in the tech tree, there's a part we can use to connect these to keep these solid. They will stay firm, they won't budge, and they will separate when we go to separate the rocket. So that's pretty cool. I don't have access to those right now, so that is something to consider. This could flex a little bit, and I want to make it aerodynamic. I'm going to put the caps on top, and you'll notice the weight of the cap dropped this number just a fraction, from 51 to 42. So we lost 9 meters per second of delta V, but that's not enough to really be concerned about. So really my only concern is if these are going to flex so much that the rocket either makes contact with it or otherwise just becomes difficult to control. I think this will be fine. We'll give it a go. If it fails, I'll cut back to this spot and adjust it and say oops. And you probably won't see that part of the video, but the intent will be the same. Let's get to orbit. One more quick side note here. The other tool that is used regularly is rotate, and rotate doesn't really have a huge place in what we're doing right now, but what it does is it's similar to the move tool, except it has to do with rotation around a point. So if I click here, it'll allow me to spin those. We don't want to do that. Now, the point I was trying to make earlier, though, is because this is effectively becomes a lever because there's a pivot point here, that's what the rockets are going to try to do. It won't be that dramatic, but it'll happen a little bit. And that can throw off our aerodynamics and basically how the craft flies. So that's what I'm a little concerned about. You would almost certainly see it do that a little bit. If we put it right in the middle, it's not quite as bad. But when you go to release them, when they're out of fuel, they're going to tend to drift into one another, and they'll hit. If you have the center point too far, if you have the rocket too far up here, basically it shoots out and then slams back into the rocket, and it takes out your engine or something. So you want this up a little bit above center, and it's going to cause that little twist to occur, like this. Whoops. I'm not grabbing it now. There we go. But it'll cause that to happen a little bit. I think we'll be okay. I don't think this is going to be a showstopper. All right, we're going to head out to the pad. And here we are on the pad. Again, the only point of this mission is to get to orbit. During this mission, we're going to use the M key. The M key will take us to this screen. This screen is going to be what ultimately gives us the ability to do some various node adjustments for our craft. And what we want to do to get to orbit, the apoapsis needs to be over 70 kilometers, so 70,000 meters. The periapsis is I'm sorry, I've got that backwards. The periapsis is the point closest to the center of the planet. The apoapsis is the point farthest from the planet. The apo will always be higher than the peri. They can be exactly the same, and when that's the case, you have a perfectly circular orbit. When it's not the same, you've got an ellipsis of some sort, and that ellipsis can look like all sorts of things. This is the moon. This is Minmus. You can see Minmus is not perfect. There's a little bit of bulge on this side of things. We will see that here too. And when we launch, what's going to happen is it will show our trajectory just like this. It'll have an arc that'll extend from where we started effectively, and it'll make an arc, and the craft will be on that line. And as that happens, we can click on that line and add points that allow us to say, okay, increase the apoapsis and things like that. I'll try to demonstrate it. The thing is you don't have a lot of time to do it. So be aware that it's not something that is going to be a deep lesson on how it works. I'm going to basically show the very basics of it. I am not going to make a perfectly circular orbit. There is not enough time for me to do that. Some people can do it without even using this screen, and I'm very impressed by their videos and their ability. I don't have that ability. So here we go. I'm going to turn on the cabin light. I am going to go ahead and throttle up to 100%, and then I'm going to pull it down to about 2/3. That's just where I like to be. These engines are going to give me everything I need to get started, so I'm not even worried about it. As we launch, we're going to tilt so that we can start to get some horizontal velocity, and horizontal velocity is what ultimately generates our orbit. So we will see what happens. And I am going to turn on the SAS just so that Jeb is earning his money. Okay, here we go. And once we get to about 60 meters a second, I'll arc over about 10 degrees. And then I'm just going to kind of let it fly there. In fact, I'm going to turn off the SAS for a bit. I have watched as, and I'm going to de-throttle a little bit, burning a little hot. I'm going to turn on Kerbal so that we can watch what that's looking like. Our thrust to weight is over 5. Usually if you're looking at 2, you're in really good shape. So we're doing really well there. I can back this way down. In fact, I think I'm going to. The apoapsis is over 100,000 feet at this point, so I could have tilted this rocket quite a bit more. Also, those engines are done. Drop them. We don't need them anymore. And then, kill that. I'm going to jump to this screen. There is our apoapsis, and this is our current orbit. As you can see, it slams into the planet at some point, so we are not obtaining orbit just yet. So what I'm going to do is right at the apo, I'm going to click. You can see there's a little circle there now. This is what upgrading those 2 buildings has given me. I will be at the apoapsis in 2 minutes, so I have about 2 minutes to get this whole thing done. I'm going to click there, and it's going to say add a maneuver or warp. I want to add a maneuver, and it gives me this little tree. And what I can do is grab the nodes on this. This is prograde, so this is basically acceleration. And I'm going to drag that, and I'm going to drag it until I'm encircling the planet. And what you'll see is a PE will pop up, which stands for periapsis. Okay, right now it's at 8,000 meters. That is in the atmosphere, so that is not orbit. That does not get us orbit. So we want to make it so this, and I can right-click on this to make it stick. And you'll notice it was highlighted in color, and then it wasn't. When I right-click on it, it sticks. So at 28,000, I accidentally closed that. I need to click it to reopen it. I'm basically going to drag this until that says over 70, and there we go. Okay, so that's what we have to do. Now, how do we do it? You'll notice this guy just popped up here. And I'm going to go back to this view. And what it is telling me is there is a marker on here now. There's a lot of information here. So to execute the maneuver we just added, it's going to take 44 seconds of burn time. We need to, the node itself is at a minute away, okay? And it's going to take this much thrust to make that happen. The first thing I need to do is I need to align to the point, and it's this blue crosshair here. If I line up with that, that is the direction that the node that I just programmed needs to fly. Eventually, you have this button here, maneuver, that we can click. We could do it now, although we're not supposed to be able to. Again, that's a bug that's in the current build, so I'm not going to use it. But Jeb will lock onto that for us, and he will do all the work for us. The other thing is I have to fire this node at 22 seconds because I want half the burn to happen on each side. So as soon as that hits 22, 23, I'm firing the rocket. Okay? And I'm just going to let it go until we're at the until this runs down to 0 burn time. This will also drop to 0. While that's going on, if I move over here, you'll notice that my arc is moving, and that's because, and now we have crossed that node point, by the way. That is going to, it's changing what our orbit currently looks like. Now, these tags that we're looking at, the red, I think they're red. I'm colorblind, I apologize, but this color here, oops, and we are out of fuel on that stage, so I need to go to the next stage and finish this up. Now the thing is, this engine is not the same one, and we could run into some difficulty. What we're going to do is just let that go to 0, as though everything was perfect, and we're going to kill it. It actually went below 0 and popped back up. And it looks like we have achieved orbit. We have an apoapsis of 125 kilometers, periapsis of 95 kilometers. Jeb is in orbit. I didn't see this guy flash, did he? Contract complete. We made orbit. Excellent. we clear that out, so we earned another 31,000, I'm going to call them credits, a little bit of science for that. And we earned 24,000 more there. So the mission to orbit is paying off. As you recall, we were down to about 16,000 credits, so we should have a little bit in the bank account here.
But at this point, this episode is running a little long, so I think we're going to end it here, and we will handle the deorbit in the next episode. Until then,
Fair travels.